So, if you have an older brother or sister, you probably know the feeling of wanting to be just like them. Or maybe you did when you were a kid and now you're like, no, I'm good, okay? But we go through phases where we look up to the siblings ahead of us, for those of you who have siblings ahead of you. They can do no wrong and their attention means everything to us. Now, for me, I grew up in somewhat of a musical family. My mom plays the piano and we always were in choir or chorus at church. And I have three older sisters and they can all sing. So I just assumed I would follow in their footsteps. And again, I would sing with the choir at church and just, no one really noticed if I could sing well or not. And it wasn't until I got to high school and I tried out for a musical theater production that I realized something. It's the same thing that the three people who were in the room for my audition realized. I can't sing. Like not even a little bit. Like it was really, really awful, y'all. And not only did I not make that musical theater production, but I realized that I'm not musical at all. I just assumed I was supposed to be musical because my sisters were. Now, looking back, I realized that, some of me imitating and copying my sisters was because I looked up to them. But it was also me trying to figure out who I was. Am I a singer like my sisters are? Was I supposed to be just a younger version of them? Or was I supposed to be someone different with my own interests, my own personality? Now, I may not have used those words, but there was a big question I was asking at that time in my life. Who am I? Who am I? Now, like me, you probably don't use those actual words, who am I? But you may have wondered or thought about some version of this question. Like what we're really asking is about our identity. Identity is what makes us us. It's what makes us unique. It's what causes us to stand out and be different. And if you're like me, you can sometimes struggle to even begin understanding how to answer this question. Now, the tricky thing about identity is that most of the time we're not asking the question with just ourselves in mind. We're deciding who we are based on what the people around us think of us or based on who they are. Like we tend to think of identity as what others expect of us. We think about what other people want us to be or what they need us to be. We constantly feel the pressure to live up to the expectations of family or friends or teachers, coaches. Our parents want us to be responsible, so we see responsible as being part of our identity. Or coaches want us to be a leader, so we make that part of our identity. It's not who we actually are as much as it is what people think we should be. Now, at the same time, we tend to connect our identity to areas where we feel judged by others. We see ourselves through the lens of being not enough of whatever they expect from us. We're not, funny enough, tall enough, confident enough, the list athletic enough, the list goes on and on. We connect who we are to areas where we feel like we don't measure up. And for you, maybe you realize that you're more than the label or judgment others have placed on you, but you're not sure what that means or what that even looks like. You just know that what others have given you is an incomplete picture, and there's more to you than other people realize. Also, we tend to connect our identity to our image. We see our identity as how we appear to others. Others see us as a star athlete, so that's how we see ourselves. Our teachers see us as a below average student, so that's how we see ourselves. At the end of the day, the question is the same. When it comes to identity, look, the thing that bounces around in our head, the thing that feeds our insecurity or drives the decisions we make and determines the friends we have is this one big question: am I enough? Am I enough? Now, some of you may answer this question with a yes, but you probably say yes, but. And you may be quick to point out the areas where you're not measuring up. Because let's be honest, the areas where we don't measure up seem to take up a lot more of our thinking than the areas where we do, right? Now, others of you may answer the question by saying, nope, no way, because no matter what anyone tells us, we just have a hard time believing that we could ever possibly be enough. Now, however you'd answer that question, here's the good news. What we talk about today has the potential to be a game changer for you and the way you answer it moving forward. Now, I probably don't have to tell you this, but people have been wondering, am I enough since the beginning of time? And today we're going to look back at an interaction between Jesus and a group of people in the book of John, which is one of the 4 books in the Bible that are accounts of Jesus' life on earth. In this particular account, John records a miracle that Jesus performed. All right, check this out. After this, Jesus went across the Galilee Sea, that is the Tiberias Sea. A large crowd followed him because they had seen the miraculous signs he had done among the sick. Jesus went up to a mountain and sat there with his disciples. It was nearly time for Passover, the Jewish festival. Jesus looked up and saw the large crowd coming toward him. He asked Philip, "Where will we buy food to feed these people?" Jesus said this to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, "More than half a year's salary worth of food wouldn't be enough for each person to have even a little bit." So right away we see that there was a problem. Jesus preached too long, and now the people are too hungry, and the disciples are freaking out. I would be too. Like, hungry people become hangry people. You know what I mean? I don't trust myself to not lose my mind when I skip a meal. So the disciples are wondering, hey, what are we gonna do? Should we send them home? Like, none of us make enough money to buy enough food to feed these people. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "A youth here has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that for a crowd like this?" Now, Andrew mentions that there's a youth who has some food with them. And what's interesting here is that we aren't even told if this youth is a boy or a girl. It's just a young person, maybe even a child. And in the first century culture, that would have made this kid not so valuable in the eyes of society. In fact, children tended to be viewed only as property. The only value children had was in what they could do for their family. But there's something else to notice. The young person didn't even have regular bread. He or she had barley bread. And it's interesting that John decided to include that detail because back then, this was the kind of bread that people who were poor ate. This was the kind of bread you ate when you didn't have a lot of money or status. This child obviously didn't come from a family with a lot, but he or she was willing to use what they had anyway. John continues. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass there. They sat down, about 5,000 of them. Then Jesus took the bread. When he had given thanks, he distributed it to those who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish, each getting as much as they wanted. When they had plenty to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover pieces so that nothing will be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves that had been left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw that he had done a miraculous sign, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is coming into the world." And Jesus understood that they were about to come and force him to be their king. So he took a refuge again, alone on a mountain. So Jesus did something only he could do. He took a little bit of barley bread and a little bit of fish, and he fed an entire crowd. In fact, there ended up being so much food that there were even some leftovers. It's a crazy miracle. Jesus is obviously the hero of this story, but John makes it a point to draw attention to a different hero. The youth in the story, not given a name, not coming from wealth or privilege, not having a lot to offer, was still featured front and center. And I think there's a reason for that. John doesn't want us to forget the role that Jesus allowed that kid to have. Look, Jesus could have provided the food with no help at all. He made blind people see. He brought dead people back to life. It would have been nothing for him to snap his fingers and just make food happen out of nowhere. But he doesn't. He takes the food from a barely noticed child. Why? Because Jesus knew who this child was. This child was made in the image of God, and that alone made this kid a part of the story worth celebrating for all of us. Jesus knew that he wasn't limited by what this kid had or what this kid didn't have, and the same is true for you. Jesus makes what we have and who we are enough. In fact, I want you to think of it this way. You are enough because Jesus says you are enough. Let me say that again. You are enough because Jesus says you are enough.
When it comes to comparison, we will always find someone else who is seemingly better than us. And the second problem with this mindset, we compare ourselves to ourselves. We all have an invisible standard that we need to live up to. And as soon as we fail in that area, we decide we're not enough. Or let's say you play a great game. That's awesome. But then that game becomes your new standard, which means you expect to play like that every time. It's like we've raised the standard on what is enough. So you move that line higher and higher, hoping that you feel enough the next time that you play. Everyone in this room has felt not enough at some point. Even the people who seem like they have it all together, it's a universal experience. And if we're honest, we all have a hard time liking the person who doesn't measure up, the person who isn't enough. But when we add Jesus to the equation, we can stop trying to prove that we're enough, because he takes whatever we have and he makes it enough.
He turns our not enough into enough. See, it's exhausting to have so much of our identity tied up in what other people think, expect, or want from us. It makes it feel like the bar is always moving and the standard is always changing. We may be enough in this situation, but with this person today, but what about tomorrow? Who knows? It may all change, which is what makes what Jesus says and do such good news for us. His love for us doesn't change. He isn't temperamental. He isn't waiting to see how we perform. He isn't wondering what we can offer or bring to the table. He knows all that he needs to know. You are enough because Jesus says you are enough. And the feeling of not being enough, it's just part of being a human being. At some point or another, we're all gonna deal with it. So in response, sometimes we try to prove that we have what it takes. We practice harder, study harder, work harder, and put in more energy. We try to prove to people that we're the best athlete, we're the most accomplished student, or the employee of the month. Or on the flip side, sometimes we try to hide so that no one notices. Feeling like we're not enough feeds our insecurities, so we do everything we can to keep people from seeing it or sometimes even noticing us. So what can we do? What should we do when these feelings come up? I want you to start by asking yourself these questions. Number one, where in your life do you feel like you aren't enough? Is it around friends? Is it at home? When it comes to grades or sports or church? That's question number one. Number two, when you don't feel like you are enough, do you tend to respond by hiding or maybe trying to prove yourself or something different altogether? And then number three, how different would your life look if you stopped trying to prove yourself or hide in this particular area? Or to put it another way, what would it look like to believe Jesus when he says that you are enough? Number four, when you feel that way, how are you going to remember that you are enough? So one tip from my own experience, memorizing what God says is true about me helps me when I start to believe differently. Ephesians 2:10 may be a good place to start, so you check it out, all right? When we battle the feeling of not being enough, one of the worst things you and I can do is to believe that we have to deal with it all by ourselves. And that's why we care so much about small groups. That's why we just have so much respect for our small group leaders, because everyone needs someone to remind them what is true when it doesn't feel like it's true to them. So just imagine what might be possible if you started to believe that you are enough. And what if the people in your small group started to believe that they were enough? What if you walked into school believing that about yourself so that you could take a break from trying to prove or trying to hide from everybody? I really believe it could change you. I believe it could change the people around you. You are enough. Listen, you are enough because Jesus says you are enough. That's really great, and it's really, really true news. Love you.